and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, guys, we're looking at what it means to navigate relationships when both parties are hurting, and the challenge of supporting someone you love without erasing your own needs. This show today has kind of been inspired by one of the AMAs I received, and I really kind of wanted to expand on this further because I received a few emails about it and some comments on Substack when I kind of brought that topic there, and then of course on a couple of other places on social media, and I really think it's something that we need to talk a little bit more about. But first, I want to take a moment again, as I always do, to thank all of you who've been listening for a while. For those of you that are just starting to find the show, these topics come directly from the experiences and the questions you keep bringing forward, and I'm really grateful for that. So if you do enjoy the show, be sure you follow, subscribe, like. If you follow me on Spotify, leave a 5-star rating so others can find the show. That way these conversations can keep growing. And if you'd like to support the work I do, you're going to find a donation link in the show's description. Anything helps, anything big or small, it all goes to keep bringing these conversations forward. So now, this theme really matters here because crisis in relationships is not rare, and it's not limited to any one kind of dynamic, whether you're in a DS relationship, a marriage, or you're just dating someone. Even sometimes with family members, there are times when life hits you hard, and it can hit both people at once. It can feel overwhelming because the instinct is to give everything to the person you love, but when you're also struggling, that instinct can also pull you past your own limits. So what we're going to explore today is how couples can find balance in those moments so support doesn't come at the cost of self-neglect. And this is what we see often, is that people start to give and give and give to the point that they're neglecting themselves, and then they end up in collapse as well. So first, let's talk about this part, the core dilemma. When one partner is in crisis, the natural instinct for most of us is to give everything we've got. You see someone you love who's struggling, there's that pull to kind of step in, to take care of them, to hold it all together. Now, that's very normal, and it's a powerful part of what makes relationships meaningful. But here's where a dilemma shows up. What happens when you're hurting at the same time? Now, if both of you are struggling, the equation's going to change. And instead of one person pouring out and the other person leaning in, you've got two people who may not have as much left to give. Yet the expectation, whether it's spoken or even just silently understood, is that you're going to show up for each other. And that's when imbalance creeps in. One person pushes past their own limits and the other feels like a burden, or worse, resents that they're not getting the same kind of care back. Now, this can play out in a few different ways. Now, for some, it stirs up old patterns of codependency, the belief that your worth comes from fixing or rescuing the other person, even if it costs you your own health. Now, for others, it can trigger deep anxiety. The thought, if I can hold it together for them, the relationship, if I can't do this, the relationship's going to fall apart. And then depression can surface too, when the weight of your own pain mixed with your partner's leaves you feeling powerless and hopeless. And then there's anger. People don't just talk about this enough, but when partners are in pain, it's not uncommon to feel angry at the person you love. Angry that they need so much more from you when you have nothing left, and angry that life has cornered the both of you. That anger often gets swallowed down because who wants to admit that being resentful when the other person is clearly struggling, right? Then you're going to feel selfish. But pushing it down just builds more pressure. Now, in DS or even some power exchange relationships, the dilemma can take on even sharper edges. If you're dominant, you might believe you're supposed to be the rock, you're unshakable, always steady and always in control. If you're submissive, you might feel like you have to be endlessly available, constantly attentive. And no matter how raw you feel inside, the role expectations can magnify the tension here, making it harder to admit weakness or even ask for care. And the truth is, neither partner benefits when the dynamic turns rigid. So what we're really looking at is the strength that comes from the honesty, not from pretending you're unaffected. And I've talked about this before. You really need to set dynamic check-ins. This is where both parties are coming together every few weeks. You're just discussing things about the relationship or your dynamic or whatever the case may be. And you're speaking frankly. You're not in your roles. You're not husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or dominant and submissive. You're just talking as two people, what works, what's not working. And you're allowing the free space to come in so you can voice these things without any kind of fear, right? But if we shift back and look at this at its core, the dilemma here becomes about its limits. Love makes us want to show up fully, but being human means those reserves are not endless. Now, you can't give what you don't have, and yet the heat of the crisis, people often try anyway. They will continue to push through exhaustion. They're going to be quiet about their own needs, and often they're going to run on fumes until the collapse part hits. And that collapse might look like burnout, withdrawal, emotional numbness, or even physical symptoms like getting sick. That's the body and mind's way of saying, hey, this is enough. I can't do this anymore, right? So I'm going to shut down. Your cells go down, your white blood cells go down, and then an infection comes in, and boom, you're, because you're overworked, you're overtired, you're emotionally spent. So the hard part is that none of this means that love is actually gone. In fact, it usually comes from the opposite place, from love that is very strong. You'd rather risk yourself than let your partner feel unsupported. But relationships built on that kind of sacrifice eventually suffer. So what starts here is deep care can turn into resentment, or worse, a pattern where one person disappears into the role of caregiver and the other is left carrying the guilt and the shame. So the core dilemma here is this: how do we honor the instinct to care for each other without crossing the line into self-erasure? How do we hold space for our partners in crisis while also admitting, I'm not okay either? Now, that's not weakness if you do this. That's the beginning of building a relationship where care flows in both directions, even if the middle is in chaos. And I tell people often, especially if you're having a problem or somebody's going through something and then the other person is suffering, you have to remember to take a moment and say it's, both of you versus the problem. It's not you versus them, right? Because if you do that, you lose sight on what's truly important. And so this brings me into this next part here: risks of one-sided care. Now, when care in a relationship becomes one-sided, it usually starts with love. You see your partner hurting and you tell yourself, I'll carry more now because they need me. Now, in the short term, that feels right? But when that pattern stretches out, the cost is going to build quietly. One of the first things that shows up is resentment. You might not even want to admit it because it feels selfish to be angry at someone who's in pain. But underneath all of that, this thought creeps in: I'm giving so much of myself and it's not being noticed. That's resentment. That resentment often simmers until it starts to leak out in small ways. You have shorter patience, your remarks become a little bit more sharp, or sometimes you might even just withdraw altogether. Now, it doesn't take long before the relationship itself starts to feel heavier than the crisis that set it off. Burnout here is another real risk, and it happens very often. Caregiving that's one directional drains not just energy, but also the connection itself. You run on adrenaline, you convince yourself that you can hold everything together until your body and your mind start to rebel. Your sleep is going to suffer, your appetite's going to drop, your concentration's not going to be there, and your emotions are going to flatten. In some cases, you might even just full out crash. And the crash is your nervous system giving out, a kind of forced stop, maybe even a forced reboot, if you will. And that's not weakness. It's what happens when you push past your limit for far too long and just think it's okay. I can keep going at this pace because you know what? If I care and I push hard enough, they're going to see how much I want to take care of them and how much I love them, right? It's not going to work. And this is where the collapse comes in of yourself. If you're always the one that's giving, your own needs start to feel less important and you are almost invisible. Over time here, you're going to forget what it feels like to even ask for care for yourself. Now, that disappearance is dangerous because it hollows out the balance that healthy intimacy needs, right? Relationships have to have some sort of balance, even when we're not feeling well. And it often leads to guilt on the other side. The partner receiving the care feels ashamed for taking so much, but they're also stuck and unsure of how to return it. And in lifestyle relationships, these risks can hit even harder. A dominant who feels that they have to be unshakable might hide their pain, or they are piling on pressure until the role itself becomes the burden. And a submissive believes they must be available, to push through their exhaustion, afraid that, if they say no or setting limits is going to be seen as failing the dynamic or failing their submission. So when the script of Dom is vulnerable or sub as endlessly giving gets too rigid here, it traps both of you. The Dom becomes isolated in their strength, and the sub disappears into service. None of this is sustainable at all. And crisis also tends to narrow the spotlight here. All attention goes to the partner whose pain is loudest in the moment. The quieter suffering of the other fades into the background. And in a DS context, if we're looking at it through this lens, this can twist the dynamic into something that becomes unrecognizable. The dominant's going to probably overextend, holding everything until they collapse, and then the submissive may overfunction until they burn out. Now, what gets lost is the truth that both roles are human first. Both need care and both need permission to have limits. And I've talked about this before, right? People have asked me, when in the past, when I've structured or I've explained structures of relationships, what comes before a dynamic? Well, I have things that I think, at least for on a personal level, that I believe supersedes any dynamics. Your health, your job, right? If you decide you want to go back to school, your actual relationship itself, even if that just means your relationship with yourself. And if you have family. Now, how you start structuring after that, maybe friends or other things or extended family or vacations or whatever else with you want to go on a cruise by yourself and how that's going to affect the relationship probably is going to be structured afterwards. But those 4 or 5 core things supersede most things. If I'm not healthy, I'm not going to be able to show up in a relationship. If I'm really busy at work, this is how I sustain myself. This is how I pay my bills. If I want to go back to school and get an education, we shouldn't be stifling our partners. We'd want them to grow, right? But it's kind of circling back to all of this. The hardest part is that love can make these risks harder to see. Because you care so deeply, you override the signals. You tell yourself, hey, it's fine. I can take it. They come first. But when this goes unchecked, one-sided care doesn't deepen intimacy in the ways that most people think it does. It actually begins to erode it. Now, resentment grows. Burnout flattens this desire we have. The structure of the dynamic, instead of being the source of strength, starts to feel like a cage. The lesson here isn't that care is wrong. It's that care without balance comes at a cost neither partner can afford. In any relationship, lifestyle or not, if one person disappears into the role of caregiver, the connection between both of them begins to fray. Now, here's some shifts that help. When both partners are struggling, the relationship can feel like it's teetering on shaky ground. But there are shifts that make the difference between collapsing under the weight of crisis and finding a way to move through it together. Now, these aren't quick fixes. I'm not giving you something that's just going to take you 5 minutes. They are small, and they are steady changes in how you approach each other. The first is naming both realities. And this does sound simple, but saying it out loud, I know you're hurting, and I'm hurting too. That changes the dynamic. It puts both experiences on the table instead of one person swallowing into the other. And many people avoid doing this because they're afraid it'll sound selfish or they like minimizing their own pain for their partner's pain. But honestly, here, it creates clarity. It lets both partners know the full picture. In a DS relationship, this can be hard because it feels like it's breaking the role. A Dom might think, hey, if I admit I'm struggling, it's going to undermine my authority. And a sub might think, if I admit I'm overwhelmed, I'm failing in my service. But the truth is that it strengthens the bond more than that silence ever could. And I do talk about this often when I'm working with people. And I tell them, people will say to me, well, that just sounds ridiculous. Why would I say it out loud? Because if you don't say out loud how you're feeling so others can understand, and I'm not talking, you don't have to make a spectacle out of it, but you can't say, I'm really just struggling right now. You don't have to go beyond that. You don't need to give them any more of yourself. But that little bit of vulnerability, what that does is it lets people know, hey, you are struggling. You are in pain. You aren't feeling well. Something is wrong. They don't need to maybe explore it any further unless you want to talk about it. But it gives them a conduit to understand something is going on, because if not, and you kind of just expect them to know, there are going to be problems inside of that expectation, right? Now, the next shift here is redefining support. Now, too often we think support means fixing the problem, taking away the pain, or finding some sort of perfect solution. But when both people are hurting, fixing is rarely possible. What matters more is presence. If you're sitting together in that discomfort, being honest about your limits and offering reassurance that you're in this together. And if we look at lifestyle dynamics, this might mean shifting rituals to be about, less perfect and more about grounding. Maybe a check-in before bed, or a small act of care that says, I see you and I am here, right? I'm just not 100%. So support becomes less about solving and more about sharing. And this way, we can also move away from, if we're noticing patterns of selfishness, we're moving away from that, because we're opening the lines and dialogue of communication here, and we're letting both people know, hey, this is where I'm at. Now, boundaries in crisis are another essential shift. Now, this isn't about walls. It's about clarity and being able to say, I can listen for 20 minutes, but then I need to rest. That's not abandoning your partner. It shows them where you're able to give without running yourself completely on empty. Now, boundaries are what prevent burnout and resentment from creeping in. Inside of lifestyle, boundaries can actually strengthen trust when we use them well. And this is something we, is constantly said inside of lifestyle. I constantly write about it. I constantly talk about it. So if there is a dominant who says, I need time to recharge before I can lead us through whatever, models more about responsibility rather than weakness. And if a submissive can actually say, I can't be available for everything right now, but here's what I can give, that's demonstrating honesty rather than failure. And boundaries help both partners know the ground they're standing on. Now, finally here, flexibility in roles is completely key. Relationships, especially in the lifestyle, thrive on structure, but structure should serve stability, not rigidity. And during a time of crisis, softening the edges around those roles can keep the bond strong. A Dom who allows themselves to receive comfort instead of always giving it, or a sub who steps back from constant availability to protect their well-being, doesn't weaken the dynamic. And that's the part we have to move past. You're actually then adapting it. Flexibility doesn't erase power exchange, it makes it sustainable, right? Because life is never not going to be constant. The world's not going to be constant. The world isn't the same that it was 50 years ago, to 20, to 10, to 5, to 2 weeks ago, to where we are now. Things are constantly changing, and we have to learn to adapt and keep moving forward, right? So these shifts are about creating a space for both people's humanity. They remind us that love and care and power exchange don't exist in a vacuum. Life's going to interrupt you. Life has other plans. Crisis disrupts this. But with honesty and presence and clear limits and flexibility, relationships don't just survive those moments, they come out stronger. They're building something better, right? So now I want to kind of paint some broader insights into all of this for you. One of the hardest truths about caring for someone you love is that supporting them doesn't mean disappearing yourself. And some of you are going to need to sit with that, because there are so many that get caught in the belief that I just have to give and give and give until I've got nothing left to prove. But you don't. And too often, people equate love with sacrifice. They believe that to be a good partner, they have to silence their own pain, set aside your own needs, and focus solely on the other person. But that kind of love is completely unsustainable. And I don't know a relationship that can thrive if one person has to vanish for the other person to survive. That's not a relationship. What actually strengthens relationships is when both people stay present, even if that presence is imperfect or uncomfortable. Saying, I'm here with you, but I'm hurting too, might not sound romantic, but at least it's real. It creates a bond based not on fantasy or role expectations, but truth. And truth is what relationships are built on. And so often I keep seeing people I want to do this. This is how I want to serve. This is the type of dominant I want to be, or this is the type of relationship or marriage or boyfriend or girlfriend I want to have. But we overlook that we're so stuck into the fantasy and we're not realizing the reality of what goes on every day. So when you show up honestly, even in your limits, you give your partner something they can actually rely on. And mutual care is possible, even in the middle of a crisis, but it's going to look different from what many people expect. Mutual care isn't always symmetrical. You may not be able to both give at the same amount at the same time, but you can both be on the table. Maybe one partner is a little bit deeper in crisis and needs more day-to-day support. That doesn't erase the other person's pain. It just means care is balanced differently in this moment. The important part is that both parties recognize, both parties' realities are acknowledged and that both people have the space to express what they need. In lifestyle relationships, the idea can feel complicated. The structure of DS involves clear roles. One leads, one follows, one directs, one serves. And when when life is stable, those structures bring comfort and strength. But in crisis, that rigidity can turn them into certain traps. If a Dom refuses to admit vulnerability for fear of looking weak, that risk, becomes collapsing into silence. And a sub who believes their value comes only from being endlessly available risks disappearing into exhaustion. Now, neither one of those examples is sustainable. And people have told me, oh, I can keep this going forever. Really? Well, how long do you think you can do that? A week, a month? And then what? Then if you are endlessly available or you are endlessly trying to be strong and not recognize your own limitations, you will collapse. Lifestyle structures can absolutely hold steady through a crisis as long as they serve stability and not rigidity. A Dom can still lead by being transparent. Here's what I can give right now, and here's what I need, where I need you to step in. A sub can still serve by being clear. I can support you in these ways, but I can't carry everything. The dynamic doesn't have to collapse because both partners are human. In fact, the whole strength of a DS relationship is often shown in its ability to bend without breaking. Or if the crisis is deep enough, you can even consider suspending the DS relationship just to support each other through the crisis. That doesn't mean the relationship is failing. It just means what you need to focus on. Because quite honestly, if you are going to then start saying, oh no, we're not going to stop this, and somebody's in crisis, the last thing either a Dom or a sub or any type of partner is going to want to do is continue their roles and trying to minimize the impact of the crisis alone, right? Supporting without disappearing also means redefining what strength looks like. Now, for many, strength has been modeled as stoicism, never admitting weakness, never showing cracks, but real strength in relationships is adaptability. It's the courage to be honest about your limits. It's the ability to shift roles when needed, not because the dynamic is broken, but because the bond matters more than the script. It means recognizing that care doesn't always look grand. Sometimes mutual care is found in the smallest actions, sitting quietly together, checking in with simple, how's your energy today? How are you feeling? Creating a space where both of you can show up as you are, not as you think you both should be. These small acts create stability in the middle of chaos. There's also insight that imperfection is not failure. And too many couples collapse under the weight of believing you should get it right every time. But the reality is, in crisis, there's going to be moments of frustration, resentment, and even withdrawal. That doesn't mean the relationship is broken. It just means you're human. The key is whether you can come back to each other, naming what's happening, and reorient yourselves. In their lifestyle, this is especially important because scenes, rituals, and the structures we do can sometimes be treated as rigid rules instead of living agreements. Allowing imperfection makes space for growth, not collapse. And another piece that's often overlooked here is the mutual care requires trust in yourself as much as your partner. If you don't believe you have the right to take up space in a relationship, you're never going to ask for what you need. And if you don't believe your partner can handle your truth, you're going to keep silencing yourself. You're going to shrink, right? And how you started in that relationship is going to become the shell of who you were. Real intimacy comes from trusting that your needs can be spoken and that your partner can hear them, even if they can't fix them. And sometimes we're not even asking our partners to fix our issues. We just need them to listen. And this is what I often discuss about. I've said this before in the past. Your dom, your sub, your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or anybody in between, they are not your therapist. So don't go to them trying to ask them to fix every emotional issue you have. Crisis is different. It can sit with you, but don't lean on them for that type of support. That's not why they are there. They can be your best friend and your lover and everything else that you need. But there are limitations to that. Now, look, at the end of the day, the broader insight is this. Crisis doesn't destroy relationships. What destroys them is rigidity and silence and self-erasure. Relationships that aren't the ones, the ones that last aren't the ones that don't have a struggle. They're ones that where both people stay visible to each other, even when it's hard. Now, think about that for a second. Not if every relationship broke up because there was a struggle, we wouldn't have, and nobody would have a relationship. When we look at relationships that have lasted 10, 20, 30, 40 years, those people will tell you, this is my best friend, this is my partner, this is my lover, whoever they are to them. But we have fought, we have argued, we have gone through things together, and we've come out stronger for it. Right? They are the ones where both people stay visible to each other when it's hard, when care flows in both directions, even if it's a little bit uneven at times. That's where love is defined not by sacrifice, but by the willingness to adapt, to stay honest, and to hold space for both truths at once. Now, as I start to close this conversation today, I want you to sit with the idea that love and care are not about disappearing. They're about being present with your partner, yes, but also with yourself. In the moments of crisis, it can feel easier to silence your own needs, to convince yourself that the strongest thing you can do is carry all of the weight. But strength without balance breaks down. And the truth is, relationships that are built to hold two realities at once, they're not just built to hold one person's view forever. It's not sustainable. So what we've touched on here today isn't just about surviving the hard times. It's about creating something that can last, whether you're in a relationship, if you're in a marriage, or you're in a dynamic or any type of partnership. The real test is, isn't when life is easy. It's when both of you are hurting and you still find a way to stay connected. So the question I'm going to leave you with today is, when you and your partner are both in pain, how do you stay present without losing yourself? This is the conversation I want to have with you all. This is the conversation I want you to have with your partners. Maybe this has been an ongoing thing you haven't discussed yet, or you two have created something to help you get through the hard times. I'd love to hear about that. That it's not about helping me, it's also about helping others that read these comments, that read these discussions, to make them feel seen, like, oh, I never thought about that, or I'm not alone in this, because you're not. This is why we have these conversations. They're not easy. Talking about crisis isn't easy, right? And crisis can look different to each person, and I'm not going to go into a myriad of examples for each one. But this is where we're at. Now, a couple of things I want to get to here. First, Hi There Catsuit is going to be slated to come on the show. If you don't know him, he runs the podcast called Authentically Kinky. He just got back from Greece. He had an amazing time there. Cannot wait to discuss that with him. I want to talk to him about his travels abroad, kink around the world, his affinity for his cat suits, all of it. We're going to get to that. Yes, I haven't forgotten. I've gotten this question. Chris, when are you going to let your next worksheet come out? I'm working on it. I am. I'm just busy. And please bear in mind that when I give you these worksheets, I don't charge you guys for any of this. This is all free. You can download it from my website. Go to the resources page. There's, I think, 7 or 8 different downloads now. They're all there for free. So go there, take a look. But I will try to get the next one out very soon. I promise. My book. For the person who asked me not to keep denigrating myself. All right, fair enough. I do have a book, Tangled Desires, the intersection between psychology and BDSM. It's my first book I've ever written. It is a little bit repetitive, but it's out there and it's got some informative stuff. So if it helps you, great. The price is low enough. Hey, you're not going to lose a lot, but it should give you some insight into some different things and kind of help you expand if you're new, or maybe reinforce some notions if you've been around for a while and need a refresher. It's there. I'm going to move into a section that I've started over the last few weeks or over the last month called You're Famous Now. So there's a lot that, as you're more in the public scene, I never really thought I would ever discover, which is just vitriol from people is probably the nicest way to say it. And a lot of times I don't really understand why. Now, first thing I want to do is I want to acknowledge a comment I received. I've received a really nice email or a concerning email, especially given the last couple of weeks. When I make comments on my show, for the most part, if you want clarity about what I'm saying, do you like what this person said? Send me an email, ask me what I meant. We did go back and forth. I explained my stance, but I will say this. What I say is what I say. If you want clarity as to what I meant, you're free to ask me, and then I will probably tell you. But I don't think inside of almost 4 years now, I don't apologize for what I say, just because it's uncomfortable to sit with or think about or experience or consider. That I'm not responsible for, right? So I'm not saying this because I'm trying to be mean, but just because you don't agree with something I'm saying or don't like what I'm saying, that doesn't mean I'm going to change it or necessarily that I'm wrong. If I'm explicitly wrong, if I've, talked about, the blue apples and I should have been saying the red apples, well, sure, then that's something wrongly I've said. But if you just don't like it because you don't like it, well, you're going to have to sit with that discomfort and ask yourself why, right? I'm even open to a debate, but I'm not going to apologize for things I've said. I will give, like I said, I'll give you clarity. Like I received a wonderful email, clarified my stance. They thanked me. They looked into it further, found out what I, understood and kind of agreed to what I was saying, and we moved forward. However, let me get to some other things because this has been an interesting couple of weeks, especially given certain political events and the way that our community has gone. So I have a new segment here I do at the end called You're Famous Now. And the first one here is from Lucid Linda, right? Because I just couldn't really understand beyond that. But Lucid Linda was pretty much anything but lucid, but basically told me to go F myself because somehow I started talking about ducks, but I've never had a show where I've really talked about ducks. I think maybe I've joked about stuff like that in the past. Don't really know. But then that I should never open my mouth about furry ducks ever again. Don't really know, but there was more so the fact that she was telling me to go F myself and I'm stupid and I don't know what I'm talking about. But I don't really think she was as lucid as she thought or clear. So, Linda, I'm sorry, don't know what you mean, but no, I'm not going to go do any of those things. The next one is from Javi Got a Problem, right? Javi definitely has a problem with me because didn't agree with my show where I was talking about jealousy because, jealousy is apparently not something they experience. Okay, well, I understand that. Fair enough. If you don't get jealous, you don't get jealous. But to make the claim, Javi's got a problem. Javi had a problem with me saying that people experience jealousy when he was saying jealousy is not experienced by anyone. And that I don't know what I'm talking about and I should open up a book. Well, interesting enough, if you actually read clinical studies, you'll see the emotion being displayed and we do understand it. This is why we actually have a word for it, Javi. It's called jealousy, right? Jealousy is not envy, but you know what? Javi thought he knows better and that his Google advice was much further sound. The other colorful adjectives I'm not going to add in. And finally, this was just a smaller one. I don't actually know if they were from Tokyo. Don't really know, but Tokyo Sam, because that's just what they said, didn't really give me. I don't know if they were a man or a woman, but Tokyo Sam was displeased because I'm not speaking more on certain subjects and they're calling me a coward for not talking about them. Well, when I choose my shows, Sam, I choose what I want to speak about, what I think the community is asking me about, and I don't really shy away from anything. As a matter of fact, my show a couple of weeks ago, where I kind of got into some political nature around certain things, was as closest to politics and BDSM I'm really going to get, because how I view the world doesn't really matter because I'm not here for that. And number two, I have another show slated. I'm going to get into discussion on race play because it's not limited. And there's a whole lot of races out there. So it's not just limited to a duality of a conversation. But just because you think I'm shying away from it or I haven't discussed it yet doesn't mean I will. And it doesn't make me a coward. It just means I have a life and I have other things I want to get to. You can hate on me all you want. You can tell me to go jump off of a bridge like you kindly did. I don't really understand that type of sentiment. If you don't like me, why do you keep listening? You don't need to. If you hate me, leave it. You know what? Leave a bad review. I really don't care. But I don't really understand the hatred from it. And this is the problem with people. We're not even having discussions anymore. We are just spouting what comes off to us, right? Not living through our crisis. We're not talking about it to each other. We're just becoming angry and vengeful. It's not going to work, right? I don't take to that. And it's kind of why in my life, when people ask me, I'm a private person and I'm going to keep it that way because I prefer my privacy. Because, like I told you guys in the past, I want to center this on the work. So if I make myself this all about me and where I went to school, where I lived, and everything I've ever done, then it's not about the work. And there are a lot of people out in the psychology world that I really respect. Some have made it about themselves and others have still make it about their work. I tend to lean towards the people that make it about the work. Right? But that's okay. Whatever resonates with you, go with. Anyway, so that's it for You're Famous Now. These 3 little installments. I know. And don't apologize. You all, I really appreciate the support. You don't have to say you're sorry that I get it. I share this now because I've kind of found that if I get it, if I say it, it doesn't sit with me anymore. It goes through me. So I appreciate that. No need to tell me. I'm a big boy. I can take it. I'm just like, again, some of the comments I'm going to share, some of them I'm not. Anyways, when I get back to, let's wrap up today and let you all get on with your days. Let me know what you think about today, right? Dealing with crisis inside of your relationships and how you're handling it. Let me know. I want to hear. I want to keep this conversation moving forward. Let's keep talking about it, right? Don't sit in that silence. Don't shrink yourself because you don't think you're important enough because somebody else's pain you feel trumps yours. That's not how it works. You're equals. You're partners in a relationship, right? Remember, it's you and them versus the problem. It's not you versus them, with the problem kind of, about a trauma Olympics going on, whose pain is worse. You're both in pain. And remember why you came together in the first place, right? Don't let one moment destroy everything you built. And if your relationship's that fragile, then the relationship was never meant to keep going forward in the first place, right? That's the things you got to start looking out for. Find me on my socials, right? Let me know. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay keen.